All right, Genesis chapter 46, and in the last chapter, we saw how at the second meeting with Joseph and his brethren, he revealed himself to them, and they were reconciled. He sent them back home to get their father and all the family and bring them back to Egypt. So we come to chapter 46, and we have, first of all, the journey of Israel to Egypt, verses 1 through 7, and then the children of Israel are listed. Those that came with Jacob, verses 8 to 27. And then Joseph is reunited with his father, verses 28 to 34. So let's begin verse 1. And Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac. And God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt. For I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I'll also surely bring thee up again. And Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. And Jacob rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, and their little ones, and their wives, and the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry them. And they took their cattle and their goods which they had gotten in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt. And Jacob and all his seed with him, his sons, and his sons' sons with him, his daughters, and his sons and daughters, and all his seed brought he with him into Egypt. So on their way down to Egypt, Jacob and his family stop in Beersheba. That's where he had lived as a young man. Back in chapter 28, verse 10, we find that. And it's a significant place in his family's life. It was the place where Abraham made a covenant with Abimelech and called on the name of the Lord. Find that at the end of chapter 21, verse 31 to 33. It was the place where the Lord appeared to Isaac, and in response, he had built an altar. And so, for example, we'll go ahead and read this, chapter 26. Verse 23 to 25. Genesis 26:23. So he appears to Jacob, said, I'm the God of thy father. And Jacob is worshiping the God of his father Isaac. Well, what happened in Beersheba with Isaac? Chapter 26, verse 23. The word of God said, He went up from thence to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared unto him the same night, and said, I am the God of Abraham thy father. Fear not, for I am with thee, and will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake. And he builded an altar there, and called upon the name of the Lord. He pitched his tent there, so they stayed there for a little while, and there Isaac's servants digged a well. And that's not all, but that's just giving you an example of the significance of Beersheba for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so while they're there, Jacob offers sacrifices to the God of his father, and God speaks to him again. I believe this is the seventh time you see the Lord appearing and speaking to Jacob. We won't run all those references. You can find those for yourself. I got them written down, but I won't take the time to do that. But in the visions of the night, he wants to assure him that it was his will for his family to go to Egypt. And he needed that assurance because he likely knew something of the problems it had caused Abraham when he went to Egypt. And his father was warned not to go to Egypt. In chapter 26, verse 2, the Lord plainly tells Isaac, don't go down to Egypt. So Jacob is on his way there, but he's evidently not sure that's what he needs to do. And so as he calls on the Lord and wants the Lord's guidance, the Lord gives him that. Says, yes, I want you to go, and here's what I'll do for you. It's interesting that he called him by his old name, Jacob. And he said, Jacob, Jacob. It's like what he said to Abraham in chapter 22, Abraham, Abraham. And there's a number of people in the Bible that God, when he speaks to them, he says their name twice like that. And it's in mercy and speaking in grace. And so he had changed his name to Israel, so why is he calling him Jacob? Well, maybe it's because he's reminding him of what he had been and how God had changed him. And Jacob has come a long way. He's certainly not perfect, but he's not what he was. The Lord has worked in his life. And he made 4 promises to Jacob, which go beyond the immediate circumstances of the famine. So he's traveling to Egypt because of this famine, and God makes these promises, but it goes beyond that. It's not just what's happening right then and there. First of all, while there, his family would become a great nation. So you think about it, they're leaving the land of promise, they're going down to Egypt. Would they get mixed in with the Egyptians? What would become of the Hebrew people? And God reassures them, saying, look, there in Egypt, I'm going to make you a great nation. Isn't that what God promised Abraham in Genesis 12, verse 2, that he would make of him a great nation? Well, so far, they're a family numbering in the 70s altogether. But yet God's saying when you go down there, it's there you're going to become a great nation. Well, that implies then they're going to be there a while, right? They're not going to just be there to ride out the famine. The Hebrew people are going to be in Egypt for a while. Secondly, he would go with them. I mean, leaving the land of promise, going down into Egypt, that can be a dangerous thing. It could be reason to cause Jacob fear, but God said, look, I'll be with you. Now, you remember back in chapter 28 when Jacob started out, when he had left home, how the Lord appeared to him at Bethel. And the Lord told him there, I'm going to be with you in your journey, and I'm going to bring you back home. And he had done that. God had made this promise to Jacob before, and Jacob knew that God was faithful. It had been proven in his life. And so there's no need for him to fear since God is with him. And that's the thing, we don't have to live a life of fear. God's not given us the spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind, Paul said. Now, we fear God, but when we do that, we don't have to fear anything else. No matter the circumstances of life, if we trust the Lord and realize He's not only with us, He lives in us by His Spirit, we don't have to fear. And then thirdly, He would bring them up again from Egypt, saying, you're going down, but I'm bringing you back up. You're not going to stay down there. And remember, whenever God ratified the covenant with Abraham and the vision He gave when he was in a deep sleep, God gave this great prophecy in Genesis 15. In Genesis chapter 15, verse 12. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. And lo, an horror of great darkness fell upon him. He said to Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs. And we know that's Egypt. And shall serve them. And they shall afflict them 400 years. So Abraham knew, he didn't know, God didn't say it was Egypt at this point, but we know that's the case. They're going to be there 400 years. Also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, and thou shalt be buried in good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. When they come out, God's going to use them to judge the Amorites and when they come back into the land. So that's a detailed prophecy, and it all happens just like God said, because when God gives prophecy, it's literal and it's specific and it's always fulfilled, just like He said it would be. And so they're gonna go down, become a great nation, and at first they're gonna prosper, but then they're gonna be afflicted. They're gonna become servants. But God is still with them even in that. And then He's gonna bring them out with a great deliverance. And then lastly, He said that Joseph will be with them when he dies, when Jacob dies. That's basically what He's telling them when He talks about Joseph will put his hand upon thine eyes in death. You see that fulfilled in chapter 50, verse 1. Joseph fell upon his father's face and wept upon him and kissed him. That's when he dies. And you've seen it happen where someone dies and their eyes are closed down like that, their eyelids. And so I believe what God is implying here is you're going to go down there and your family's going to be there a while. In fact, you're going to die there, but you're going to see Joseph and he's going to be with you when you die there. So these are 4 great promises that He makes to reassure Jacob about going down to Egypt. All right, and so you see how many times in our study, how many times with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, how God he not only made the promises concerning the Abrahamic covenant, he's always confirming those promises. No matter the circumstances, he reassures the patriarchs that his promises will be fulfilled. So in chapter 46, we begin in verse 8, and bear with me on these names. I'll do the best I can. I think this is the last time in Genesis I have to read a bunch of names, and I'm thankful that I've made it through. I may have butchered them, but I at least read them. In chapter 46, verse 8, and these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt, Jacob and his sons, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and the sons of Reuben, Hanok, and Phalu, and Hezron, and Carmi. And the sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, and Ohad, and Jachin, and Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanitish woman. Now notice how Shaul is specifically, he has a different mom, and the implication is, and I believe it's true, and it's important to note this, that Simeon's wife had died in Canaan. And he shouldn't have took a Canaanitish woman. See, this is part of the problem. Israel's getting mixed too much with the Canaanites. That's one of the reasons why God's getting them out of there for a while, to develop them as a nation, a separate nation. You say, well, how are they going to be a separate nation in Egypt? Because that's the point. When they get there, they're going to be dwelling separated from the Egyptians in a specific land in Egypt. Okay, verse number 11, and the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, and the sons of Judah, and Onan, and Shelah, and Pharez, and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. And the sons of Pharez were Hezron and Hamul, the sons of Issachar, Tola, and Puvah, and Job, and Shimron, the sons of Zebulun, Sered, and Elon, and Jahiel. These be the sons of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob in Padanaram with his daughter Dinah. All the souls of his sons and his daughters were 33. And the sons of Gad, Ziphion, and Haggai, and Shunai, and Esbon, and Eri, and Oridai, and Orelai, and the sons of Asher, Jimnah, and Eshua, and Usru, and Beriah, and Sarah, their sister, the sons of Beriah, Heber, and Malchiel. These are the sons of Zilpah, as one of the handmaid, whom Laban gave to Leah's daughter, and these she bare unto Jacob, even 16 souls. So you see how they're being divided up according to their mom. All right, now notice how Rachel's mentioned differently. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife. I mean, God in His Word recognizes Rachel as being Jacob's wife. He doesn't really recognize the others, because God's will has always been one man and one woman. God never approved of polygamy. Jacob was wrong for that. God never commended it and approved it. It's just interesting. I mean, God, when He talks about Jacob's wife, it's always singular, and it's always Rachel. That's as far as from God's perspective. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, Joseph and Benjamin. And unto Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, which Asenath the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bare unto him. And the sons of Benjamin were Bela and Becher and Ashbel and Gera and Naaman and Ehi and Rosh, and I love these names here, Muppim and Huppim. That was one of the original Muppets. I don't know. Moopim and Hoopim. I don't know how you say them. And I like the last one, Ard. Now, there you go, Ard. So sometimes we think of Benjamin as being a little boy whenever he's brought to Egypt, but he's a grown man. He has all these sons, but he's the youngest of the brothers. These are the sons of Rachel, which were born to Jacob. All the souls were 14. And the sons of Dan, Husham, and the sons of Naphtali, Jasil, and Gunai, and Jezer, and Shilem. These are the sons of Bilhah, which Laban gave unto Rachel his daughter, and she bare these unto Jacob. All the souls were 7. All the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, besides Jacob's sons' wives, all the souls were 66, so 66. And the sons of Joseph, which were born him in Egypt, were 2 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70, so for a total of 70. Now, Jacob's whole family went with him down to Egypt. And there were 33 descendants of Leah in verses 8 to 15, 16 descendants of Zilpah in verses 16 to 18, 14 descendants of Rachel. Again, they're divided according to the mom. So, I mean, these are the sons of Jacob through these different women. You have Rachel, verses 19 to 22, and then 7 descendants of Bilhah, verses 23 to 25. So that's 70 when you add those numbers up. So why does he say 66? Well, if you go back and pay attention, you notice that and Onan died in the land of Canaan. And then you notice that Manasseh and Ephraim were already in Egypt. They weren't born in Canaan. So you take away those 4 and you get 66. All right. Now, there's a supposed contradiction with this passage in Acts 7. Acts 7:14, then sent Joseph and called his father Jacob to him and all his kindred 75 souls. So people get confused because it says 66 and then it says 70 and then it says 75 and they say, see, the Bible's not true. No, the Bible's still true. You're just not very bright. That's the problem, okay? If that's what you think. If you think there are problems in the Bible, the problem's in your head, okay? This book is the Word of God. It's proven itself for hundreds of years to be, in English, the King James Bible, over 400 years, the perfect Word of God. And then before that, thousands of years, God's Word has stood. And who are you, because you don't understand some numbers, to say there's a problem in the Bible? That's how arrogant people can be. But there's an answer, of course. Stephen gives the number 75 because he's talking about all his kindred. That's very general, all his kindred. Moses, when he wrote Genesis 46, specified that 66 were all the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins. That's very specific. Stephen speaking generally, Moses more specific. So there were 66 people traveling with Jacob. Then when they got there, when you add Jacob, Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh, there was a total of 70. You see? So there's 66 in verse 26, but there's 70 in verse 27 because it says it's and the sons of Joseph. So when you factor in Joseph and his sons and Jacob, now you're up to 70. And then the wives of Judah and Simeon had died. So when you add in the 9 wives of the other brothers, you get Stephen's number of 75. Because he talked about besides their wives. They weren't counted in the list. All right, did you note that? It said beside the wives of his sons. And when you count, but when Stephen's saying all his kindred, see here it's those that came out of his loins. But then when you count in the wives are now in the family, there was 9 of them. So 66 plus the 9 is 75. And Stephen is talking about those that traveled with Jacob. So the number 66 in Genesis 46 are those who traveled. But then you minus those that the 2 that had died and the 2 that are already in Egypt. And then the 70 is a different number because it includes Jacob himself and Joseph. It's the whole family in Egypt there and Joseph's sons. But then in Acts 7, the number is just those that traveled of all his kindred. And then so there's 75. I mean, it's not that difficult. You can't just breeze through a passage and notice different numbers and say, well, there's a contradiction. You got to look at the specifics and study the context, okay? There are no real contradictions in the Bible. There's always an answer. Now, God took the small number of Jacob's family and made them a great nation numbering over 1 million over the course of about 400 years. When you come into Exodus chapter 1, in Exodus chapter 1, verse 5. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed. In other words, they grew and increased, exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. And then another example would be in Deuteronomy chapter number 10, where it is said in verse number 22, Thy fathers went down into Egypt with 60 persons, and now the Lord thy God hath made thee as the stars of heaven for multitude. So God did exactly what he said he would do. W.H. Griffith Thomas wrote about this number 70. The number is 70, and we cannot help observing the symbolism of this figure when we recall the 70 nations into which the earth was divided according to the Jewish view. The 70 elders of Israel and the 70 disciples of our Lord. The number 70 seems to suggest a completed development, and it's probably for this reason that the complete list of Jacob's descendants is given in this section. Now, about the 70, the earth being divided into 70, there's some debate about it. He said that's according to the Jewish view. How they interpret the verse in Deuteronomy talked about God dividing the earth according to the sons of Israel. That could be 70, or something it could be 12. I kind of lean toward 12. And I'm not going to get into all that, but nonetheless, you see the 70 is a big number with Israel. Okay, it's an important number, and so you have the 70 as they go down into Egypt, but it's there God makes them this great nation. All right, verse 28 of Genesis 46, and he sent Judah, Jacob did. He sent Judah before him unto Joseph to direct his face unto Goshen. And they came in the land of Goshen, and Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father to Goshen, and presented himself unto him, and he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while, I bet. And Israel said unto Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art yet alive. And Joseph said unto his brethren and unto his father's house, I'll go up and show Pharaoh, and say unto him, My brethren, which in my father's house, which were in the land of Canaan, are coming to me, and the men are shepherds, for their trade hath been to feed cattle, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you, and shall say, What is your occupation? That ye shall say, Thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth even unto now, both we and also our fathers, that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination of the Egyptians. Notice, by the way, just by passing, just a little devotional thought here. They go down to Egypt. All the kids there in Jacob's family didn't go register at the University of Egypt. They had a trade. You know, that's just, anyway. Amen. It's amazing how the Bible is. You know, I mean, you just read that, but when you think about what you're reading, there's so many applications in there. There's always one interpretation, but there are things that, and that just struck me when I read it right there. I wasn't even thinking about that when I was studying it earlier. But the Bible's a living book, and it can, look, this stuff happened so long ago, but we're reading things. There are principles here that we can still apply to our lives today. Now, Joseph had sent word through his brothers that they were to dwell in Goshen, and so Jacob, as they come in, though they don't have Google Maps or anything like that, so where's Goshen? So, you know, they couldn't even stop at the convenience store and get a map. I remember one time when we were in North Carolina on vacation, I took a wrong turn and didn't know it for a while. And now finally, remember this? I stopped at a convenience store and got a map. I had to look at it. Can you imagine having to do that? That was before smartphones were so big, but you know what? I mean, out there, it didn't really matter if you had a smartphone. Didn't have a signal anyway. I was glad I knew how to read a map. I mean, I said, I know where I'm going. This is the right way. And an hour later, we were supposed to be there in like 30 minutes. An hour later, I finally realized, okay, something's wrong here. Reminds me of another time we got off the interstate because of the traffic, and I took roads, and my wife's like, where are you going? Of course I know where I'm going, man. Just don't worry about it. We drove for about 45 minutes, and we came back around the same spot we were 45 minutes earlier, made a big circle. Typical, right? And so Joseph, he had said, hey, you're going to dwell in Goshen. So when they're getting close, Jacob sends Judah. He sends him to set this up. Okay, go find out where we're supposed to be. And then, of course, Joseph would meet his father there. And so Judah had fulfilled his promise in bringing back Benjamin, and he's proven himself to be faithful. And so Jacob trusted him to be a leader. Reuben was unstable as water, as Jacob's going to say in Genesis 49, but Reuben was someone he felt like, and he had been a problem, but he got to the point where Jacob felt like he can trust him. And so interestingly, the one who sold Joseph, it was Judah who wanted to sell him, and he's the one that arranged the meeting between Joseph and his father. It's amazing how much has changed. And so Joseph rode in his chariot, and it was a Ford chariot for sure. Very nice, because it was one of the best in Egypt. And remember, it talked about he rode in the second chariot. It was almost as good as Pharaoh's chariot. And so he rides in his chariot down to Goshen, and I'm sure they were breaking the speed limit to get down there. And of course, what are you going to do? Arrest the governor of Egypt? So he gets down there in a hurry, and what a scene. I mean, I'm not an eloquent speaker. I can't paint this picture, but I mean, it's an amazing, dramatic scene. Here's Joseph. Jacob has thought he was dead for all these years, over 20 years, and yet here he is, the governor over all the land of Egypt. He's not only alive, he's alive and well, doing far better than Jacob would have ever imagined, even though God had given Joseph some dreams about his exaltation. And so all this has come to pass, and it's a very emotional scene, a lot of tears being shed, and Jacob feels like he's getting up there in years. He's 130 at this point. He feels like, now I can die in peace, knowing that everything is all right. I mean, Joseph was his beloved son, and he's okay, and everything's working out, and he has peace in his heart about it all now. Now, Joseph prepared his brethren for their upcoming meeting with Pharaoh. And, it was good for them to dwell in Goshen. That's on the eastern side of Egypt when you look at a map. As far as, where Pharaoh and most of the people were, it was east of there. And it was good for them to be there, not only because it was the best of the land, but because they'd be separated from the Egyptians while they were there. And they needed to maintain their identity. And so they were shepherds, and the Egyptians hated shepherds. And I think it might have something to do with their pagan religion and making some animals sacred and whatever. They didn't care for the Hebrews and how they dealt with their sheep and so forth and so on. But anyway, Jacob knew it was purposeful. He knew that his brethren being shepherds, that the Egyptians wouldn't want to be around him, and that was a good thing. They needed to be separated. So they could be in the best of the land and be separated, and it would all work out, because again, it's here that God's going to develop them into the nation that they become. So let's get into chapter 47 and notice in chapter 47, first of all, Joseph presents 5 of his brothers and then his father to Pharaoh. That's verse 1 to 12. And then Joseph's wise administration is described, how he ruled there in Egypt, verse 13 to 27. Then finally Jacob's dying request, verse 28 to 31. So now Jacob becomes more prominent once again. The focus had been on Joseph, but as we finish Genesis, the focus moves back to Jacob and his last words and blessings and all these things leading to his death. But in verses 1 to 6, chapter 47, then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, what is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. They said moreover unto Pharaoh, for to sojourn in the land are we come. For thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and brethren to dwell. In the land of Goshen let them dwell. And if thou knowest any men of activity among them, in other words, they're not lazy, they're diligent and productive, then make them rulers over my cattle. And so Joseph chooses 5 of his brethren. That number keeps showing up with Joseph. He gave Benjamin 5 times as much, and in his administration, the 5th part was stored annually during the years of plenty. And then he's going to tax, as we're going to see in this chapter, the Egyptians the 5th part. And there's various times that number 5 keeps showing up, and I don't really know the significance. I know 5 is the number of death in the Bible, but I don't really understand why this number 5 keeps showing up in these matters, but I'm just pointing that out. But he chose 5, not all of them, and he's wise. He had reason for that. But, Pharaoh had invited Joseph's family to dwell in Egypt, but now that they were there, they still needed his official approval for them to dwell in Goshen. And they make it clear to him, look, we're not here to stay forever. We're just going to sojourn because of the famine. And Goshen, the whole area had been hit hard, but Goshen was the best place they could have been, being shepherds. And so the meeting went according to what Joseph planned. The king even offered to let some of his brothers be rulers over his own cattle. And so Pharaoh was very generous. And that, I think, was due to the blessing Joseph had been to him, and because of Joseph's influence on him. This is a good Pharaoh. There's going to come another one later that's not, and he's going to come against the people. But this one, you see the influence of Joseph on this Pharaoh. Verse 7, Joseph brought in Jacob his father and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old art thou? And in the original Hebrew, of course, he spoke in Egyptian, but then in the original Hebrew, it literally means, dude, you look old. And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage, or maybe I should say, the days of the years of my pilgrimage, and 130 years. Good old positive Jacob here. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers, and the days of their pilgrimage. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. And so whenever Joseph brought his father before Pharaoh, it was obvious. Here's an old man, had lived a long life, and it was that being that old, they were highly esteemed in that culture, even in Egypt. And so Pharaoh's wanted to know his exact age, and because he's not a woman, he told him, right? And 130, that's getting up there, isn't it? But he lives 17 more years. He dies when he's 147. But he said they're few and evil. And that sounds negative, but honestly, isn't that what it says in the book of Job, chapter 14, verse 1? He that is born of a woman. How many of you have been born of a woman? Hope all of you have been born of a woman. He that's born of a woman is few days and full of trouble. His life is just a few days compared to eternity. And there are a lot of good days, but there's also a lot of hardship and suffering and affliction to go through in this life. And now, look, Jacob had brought a lot of the evil upon himself through his self-centeredness and his plotting and scheming and not relying on the Lord. But Abraham died at 175, Isaac at 180. You say you believe that? I absolutely do. And when you go to Genesis 5 and you have people living 800 and 900 years, I believe that too. God's the one that determines the lifespan, and he does that for a good reason. And it's gone down, obviously, and to the point where in Psalm 90, it talks about 70. And in America, they'll prop you up a little longer than that, but you'll be miserable. But that's about right, on average. And so Jacob is saying, look, I haven't attained to the years of my fathers. My days have been few and evil. But he did have words of faith here. He says it's a pilgrimage. And he talked about the pilgrimage of his fathers. And why a pilgrimage? Because in Hebrews 11, verse 13, talking about the patriarchs, it says, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, embraced them, and confessed they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity of return. But now they desire a better country, that is in heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. So they were just passing through. And these promises will be fulfilled when they're resurrected. They'll enjoy the land of promise and the city of God that'll come down out of the third heaven. All this will come to pass. But Jacob blessed Pharaoh at the beginning and the end of the meeting. And the reason that Pharaoh was blessed of Jacob is because Pharaoh had been a blessing to Jacob. Remember what God told Abraham, I'll bless them that bless thee, curse him that curseth thee. Because Pharaoh was being a blessing to the seed of Abraham, then God was going to bless Pharaoh. And so Jacob speaks words of blessing, and the Bible talks about in Hebrews 7, verse 7, that the less is blessed of the better and of the greater. And so here's this old man, Jacob, broken down old man, and yet he has more power with God than this Pharaoh, the king of the world, basically. The world power at the time. And so it's Jacob that blesses Pharaoh. Verse 11. And Joseph placed his father and his brethren and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt and the rest of the best of the land in the land of Ramses. And that's not a contradiction. It's Goshen, but Ramses is a city that's named that later, as we'll see in Exodus in chapter 1. It's noted how they built the city of Ramses, his treasure city. So Moses is writing this, okay, after the fact, obviously, and he's just noting that's where they were, in particular in that area of Goshen. As Pharaoh had commanded, and Joseph nourished his father and his brethren and all his father's household with bread according to their families. And so Jacob's family gets settled in to their possession of the land of Egypt, and Joseph made sure they were provided for just as he had promised, and there's still about 4 to 5 years left in this famine. Verse 13, and there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan for the corn which they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And when the money failed in the land of Egypt, it's like it's going to in America, and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence? For the money faileth. And Joseph said, give your cattle, and I'll give you your cattle. If money fail, I will give you for your cattle. In other words, I'll trade. You don't have any money, you trade your cattle, and I'll give you food. And they brought their cattle unto Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses and for the flocks and for the cattle of the herds and for the asses, and fed them with bread for all their cattle for that year. But eventually that ran out. When that year was ended, they came unto him the second year and said unto him, we will not hide it from my Lord how that our money is spent. My Lord also hath our herds of cattle. There is not aught left in the sight of my Lord but our bodies and our lands. Wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh, and give us seed, that we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field, because the famine prevailed over them, so the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he removed them to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt even to the other end thereof. So they're now servants, working as servants, so he's relocating them according to the need. Only the land of the priest bought he not, for the priest had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave them, wherefore they sold not their lands. And that's a principle that even the pagans understand. That these priests that were serving full-time in their office were provided for. And just like the Lord said, they that preach the gospel shall live of the gospel. So at any rate, there's a lot in here. I'm going to try to hurry for time. We're about out of time. But the famine was so bad that eventually all the money was spent to buy corn. That caused the value of the money to fail. And so then Joseph allowed the Egyptians to trade their cattle so they can keep eating. But after a year, that runs out. And so the next thing was, I'll make you servants and we'll buy up your land. Now, most of the Egyptians became the servants of Pharaoh, and he owned almost all the land of Egypt. Isn't that pretty much the goal of dictators? I mean, that's what they want to. They want to own you and your land, right? By the way, America was founded on the idea of personal property rights. Boy, what a joke now. You think you own your property. Just wait till the government wants it. Or they find some endangered species on there or something. You can't do what you want to do with your own land. You want to put up a fence, you got to go down to the bureaucrats and ask permission to put up a fence. They want you to get a permit to blow your nose on your own land. It's totally out of bounds, and I have an opinion about that, but I won't share it right at this moment because I'm running out of time. And so they ended up, what happens is Egypt became the first socialist nation. You had an elite ruling class and everybody else was servants, and the government owned everything. All right? You'll own nothing and be happy. We'll feed you. You know, a lot of people in our country, as long as they can feed their belly, they don't care if they own anything. They have no dignity, no character. They don't want to earn nothing. They want that government cheese. And what a mess. You know why our government and our leaders are so messed up? It's because the people are. We let them get away with it. We don't care in this nation. I'm talking about generally speaking. The leadership is a reflection of the deadbeats that fill this land. And so most government leaders will use a crisis to enlarge their power. And if there's not a good crisis going on, they'll make one. Like they did in 2020. They'll make one. And that's the playbook. It's been going on a long time. And you know what the devil knows? The devil said, skin for skin, all that a man hath will he give for his life. Your average person will sell their soul so they can have another meal. But what did Patrick Henry say? Give me liberty or give me death. Where are the Patrick Henrys today? People sell out just like that for their own comfort. And so verse 23, let's try to wrap this up. Verse 23, Joseph said unto the people, behold, I have bought you this day in your land for Pharaoh. Lo, here is seed for you, and ye shall sow the seed. And it shall come to pass in the increase that ye shall give the fifth part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own for the seed of the field and for your food, and for them of your households, and for food for your little ones. And they said, thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt to this day, that Pharaoh should have the 5th part, except the land of the priests only, which became not Pharaoh's. And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. So Joseph provided the people with seed so they can continue to work the land, but now they're working really for Pharaoh. But what he does is he lets them keep 80%. They had a 20% tax on their increase. And so, Joseph, during the years of plenty, had kept 20% in store to get them through the years of famine. And now in the years of famine, he charges the people this 20% tax. But again, he lets them keep 80%. And so the people were thankful for Joseph's wise leadership. It kept them alive during the famine. And we're going to see in chapter 50 where Joseph tells his brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And he talked about how God used him to save much people alive. His leadership not only delivered the Hebrews, but also the Egyptians. And so that system of taxation remained the law in Egypt long after Joseph died. And as the Egyptians lost nearly everything they owned to Pharaoh, the Hebrews actually prospered and multiplied. And so Joseph was taxing the Egyptians and nourishing his brothers. And so here's the thing I'll say, people say, well, Joseph is supposed to be a godly man. What's the deal? Do you realize it could have been a lot worse? 20% that's a generous thing. Most dictators would have taken a lot more than that. See, it could have been a lot worse. And so he was very kind in this situation. In this situation, he could have taken a lot more from him. Okay? Verse 28, we'll finish up. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. And the time drew nigh that Israel must die, and he called his son Joseph and said unto him, if now I have found grace in thy sight, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh. And again, that's symbolic of swear by your strength. The thigh symbolized strength. And deal kindly and truly with me. Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt. But I'll lie with my fathers, and thou shalt carry me out of Egypt, and bury me in their burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast said. And he said, swear unto me. And he sware unto him. And Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. And so, after living in Egypt for 17 years, Jacob began to prepare for his impending death. And that's where everything is moving from here on the rest of the book of Genesis. And he calls in Joseph. He trusts him the most. He really, frankly, loves him the most. And he said, I want you to swear to me. And that putting the hand on the thigh, it goes back to Abraham's servant. You remember that? And we talked about that already and the symbolism of that. I'm glad that's no longer a custom. That's kind of strange. But anyway, that's the way they did it back then. And so he's saying, look, don't bury me in this hellhole down here. I'm glad to be here, but I'm no Egyptian. Take me back home. When I die, bury me in the burying place of my family. And so that, and notice Israel, not Jacob, Israel, because the new name is being used. This is an expression of faith. He believed God was going to bring his descendants out of Egypt. In fact, Joseph's going to tell his family when he dies when they come out of Egypt to bring his bones. Don't leave his bones there. Joseph was buried in Egypt. He said, when you come out, bring my bones out with you. But Jacob believed that they would be delivered out, and he needed to be back. His body would be in the land of promise because he was going to be resurrected in the land of promise to enjoy that land with Abraham and Isaac and the saints that would be resurrected in the kingdom. Joseph agreed, and he fulfilled his promise, as we'll see in chapter 50. And so Jacob here bows his head. I don't think it's just out of weakness because he's so old and is about to die. I think he bowed his head in worship and gratitude. So God worked it all out for Jacob. And his dying request is he wants to be buried back home where he belongs. He knows he's going to be resurrected and enjoy that land. And so Jacob has come a long way. But we'll stop